And
Yeah, July 9th, 2023. We're here with Helen,
I'll just let you go for it.
and we're gonna just kind of wanted to ask you a few questions about life in general. You know, you're gonna be 100 years old come December. So we're just thinking about looking back on your wonderful life.
Well, it was.
So maybe we'll start with, what do you remember about your childhood? What do you recall about your school, your parents, things you did in your spare time, stuff like that. We'll let you just go from there.
Well, I had very good parents. They really were. Wish they were here now. And I had a good childhood. I had an older brother, and I was 5 years younger. And then the best thing that happened is when my sister Georgia was born, I was almost 13. And at that time, I was so excited about having a baby sister, I told my mother, "You can stay in bed when she came home from the hospital. I'll get up with the baby." And I always taught, she was just special in my life. That was the whole thing. I'm very sad that she passed away a year ago after a bad fall. But she had a good life too. And she became a school teacher. In fact, when we lived in New York, in Massapequa, Georgia had just graduated from high school in 1954, and she came back and lived with us for a year and went to Hofstra College, starting her first year of college.
Yeah.
Then she returned to San Diego State
Yeah, I remember that.
and completed her education that enabled her to teach school for many years.
Yeah, we were little kids back then.
Yeah,
So
well-
we remember, you know, that was fun. She was,
Yeah, we had a good time.
yeah.
And anyway, as far as my childhood, I lived on Terrace Drive. My family had moved there because they lived, 2 or 3 doors up with the whole Stoddarts, my grandparents, my 2 uncles, my mom and dad, and my brother all lived in a big house about 3 houses up. But when I was born, I guess they decided they ought to get a little more room, and so they moved to 4639 Terrace Drive, and that's where they stayed for the rest of their lives. Except my mother did come and stay there last year or so with us in Fallbrook, because she was, not able to, she gave up driving very young. I don't know why. I think she was just scared, really. But as far as me, I went to grammar school, and my mother tried to do the best. I had dance lessons, and I had lessons to enunciate and how to speak properly.
It must have worked.
And anyway, I went to Benjamin Franklin, and there was a teacher there that was pretty mean, Miss Townsen, and I was scared to death of her. She was my first grade teacher.
Still remember that? Wow.
Well, her fingernails and hands would go into the little arms when she'd get mad. She'd be arrested today. And I remember my kindergarten teacher was Miss Coolie.
Man.
And her father, Mr. Coolie, was the janitor at Benjamin Franklin. Actually, I started at school at John Adams because Franklin was new. And that's why I became a February graduate instead of a June graduate, because of my birthday.
Yeah, they did that a lot back in those days. Yeah.
And so that was okay. And then after grammar school, I went to Woodrow Wilson, and I learned how to play the bass viol in the orchestra. I had piano lessons, but believe me, I was not a great pianist. But they taught me how to play a big bass viol. And that was good. Then I went to Herbert Hoover, and I stayed in the band or orchestra there as well, playing the bass viol. And it was okay. I graduated February the 4th, 1942. The reason I remember that now my husband Hugh started to work for United Airlines February the 4th, 1946. So
Okay.
it was 4 years later. I didn't know him, but that's the
Yeah, that's-
relationship.
Good date.
Yeah, I had a good blind date. We met through friends. Evelyn sent her home. When I graduated from Hoover High School, I went to business college. That's right after the World War started, World War II, and the town was afire because we had so many service people. Actually, San Diego was rather small when I was growing up. I think the population was 150,000.
It used to be called a sleepy little Navy town.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
But anyway, I went to business college, and Evelyn was in well, she became Cinder Home, was in business college, and we became good friends. And then I went to work for the Navy for a while, Navy Housing, National City. And then after that, I decided I needed more education. I don't know why, but anyway, I quit the job, went to San Diego State for about a year. And, I never drove. That's another dumb thing. I had to wait until I was married so my husband could teach me. I think my dad tried to teach me once, and I ran up over something I ran into, and I got upset, and that was it. Anyway, but I remember when 1935, when the world, well, it wasn't a world fair, but it was a fair in San Diego. They'd had one previously.
Exposition or something like that?
Exposition, yeah.
Yeah.
They'd had the first one in 1915, and that's when my grandparents came out to see San Diego.
That was in Balboa Park?
Yep.
Yeah.
And, I think at the time, I was about 12 or something, and when it started, and we kids would get on the streetcar on Adams Avenue and go to the fair and spend the day by ourselves. Nobody worried about us.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was necessary to worry about us, but they didn't seem to.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. And there were many good days.
So let me ask you this. Tell me about your father a little bit. Like, for
Oh,
example, what kind of work did he do?
Well, my father was 15 years older than my mother. She was 19 and he was 34 when they were married. It always, I wish I'd asked her how did it work out. She was so bashful and kind of backward. And marry an older man who also had lost 4 fingers on his right hand in a mine accident.
Wow, boy.
And besides that, he was Catholic, and she, from a Scottish family, were Protestant, and they didn't like that. But anyway, he didn't have that. He had a brother and a sister. His brother, John, I think went to college in Denton, Colorado, at the School of Mines. Their father, the parents moved to Colorado, I think, because the father had TB, and that's where he went. And as I recall, he he had a good position. In fact, Buddy and Nancy looked him up in the history of Denver.
His brother?
Yeah, Mama's father, my guy's father. What was he? Secretary or something.
What about, now who was the cartoonist? Who was that?
Well, that's his son, John. My uncle, John,
Right.
my dad's brother. Well, I think went to the School of Mines, and then they had a younger sister, Naan, and she went to Pratt Institute in New York. I guess she left Colorado, and she became an art teacher in the Catholic schools. She was unable to teach a public school because she had something wrong with her foot and had a build-up sole on it, so they wouldn't employ anyone like that there. But anyway, John, the brother, married this woman who was later a very big person in the entertainment world, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah.
She was a saloon keeper.
Yeah.
Her name was Texas Guinan. When she was living in Colorado. And I guess, I don't know how come they got married, but that didn't last. He was probably too dull for her. And she moved to New York and became very well known. John moved to Boston and he worked as a cartoonist for the American, what was it? Boston American newspaper, that's it.
Okay.
And Naan stayed in New York. And my dad and his family, his father and the brothers had all come from Ireland. Buddy and Nancy and I went over to see the area they were from. And I guess they left after or before the potato famine.
I was after. It was in the 1870s. And it was
Oh, my
from
dad
the
was
Dingle Peninsula.
Yeah, my dad was born in 1879 in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
His brother was born before that. But anyhow, they all seemed to go west. Not all, there were some that stayed. But I didn't never understand how so many of them became lawyers. I thought, gee, it must have been easier to pass a test then. Because I can't imagine these rookies from Ireland being able to do that, but that seemed to be the way. And my folks then were living, they moved to Arizona because my father worked in the mines. That's how he got his accidental fingers cut off. And they moved to Nevada and around Reno and not Tombstone. Oh, well, my grandparents were living in Tombstone. And what is the town?
You tell me Bisby? Who lived in Bisby?
Where?
Who lived in Bisby, Arizona?
Bisby. Oh, they lived in Bisby. There were silver mines, I think.
Yeah, that was your mom lived there, right?
Yeah, and they moved a little, and but they always went where there was mining so they get work.
Well, your mom's parents came from Scotland, right? Your mom's parents were from Scotland.
Yeah, from Aberdeen.
Okay.
And they were both born in 1865, and they went to school together. And my grandfather followed his family over to Canada, and he lived in Coppercliff, Ontario, and he called for my grandmother to come over, and that's where they were married, and that's where my mother and my Aunt Anne were born.
Oh, okay.
I don't know about Henry, whether he was born in Colorado. I'm sure Bruce was born in Colorado.
So Henry was born, or let's see.
1900, Henry was born.
And then Bruce came along, he was born.
1911.
Okay, so that's a big difference.
Yeah, my grandmother was pretty old when she had him.
Yeah, but I mean, between your mother and Bruce, that's like a whole generation.
Yeah, the girls, they were a year apart. Anne was 1893, my mother was 1894. One was born in March and the other in April.
Yeah.
And they kind of took over Bruce, which wasn't right. They took him away from his mother's because she wanted to nurse him, I guess, and they thought it was time to stop. But anyway, that's past history.
Yeah.
They all moved to California after Grandma and Grandfather came out to the fair in 1915. I cannot understand how they were able to do that, but they did. And my dad had his cousin, John Moynihan, who owned the Packard Agency in downtown San Diego. So he went to work for him for a while. And
that's a good question. How did John end up owning the Packard Agency?
Beats me.
Yeah.
Well, his father and TJ came from, what was it, where they had this cemetery, not cemetery, mortuary.
Mortuary.
Not Little. What's the town in Colorado?
Well, there's Cripple Creek, and there's other one's Victor, and anyway.
Well, anyway, one owned the mortuary, John, who was the father of other children, and TJ was John's father. And interesting enough, I hear it's not really something you want to brag about, but I guess they both sent for Irish maidens to marry. And it didn't work out that well. I guess one of them, I think it was, had a child, probably had this problem after as a mental thing. They put it in an institution. And then the other one, they divorced too. Well, anyway, it was kind of a mix-up. But that's how my folks got to San Diego to work for John Moynihan.
Yeah.
And then the Stoddards, my mother's family, they were here. Not Ann, she stayed in Colorado, but the boys, they didn't have any education to work. My dad started, before this, when I guess I was a baby, my dad started a Ford rent business. Now, he was a predecessor to Hearst.
Yeah.
And they went to Yuma, the sailors went to Yuma to get married because you didn't have to go through any contest or anything. You just get married. And it was a wooden road that drove to Yuma.
It must have been something that wooden road trying to get to Yuma.
Oh,
man.
And my dad had so many peacoats for security, but he did get a diamond ring, and my mother got that after. And I think Kathleen might have it now, my niece. But anyway, that was the story. He had a partner, and unfortunately his partner ran out on him. So that was that story. Well, then he started the wrecking business, and that was very successful. He had one in India Knee, which they now have beautiful apartments on top of it. Was a lot of grease. And he had one, he started Henry in one, first in G, which became a big parking lot for Ace Parking. Henry said, I get so much money from them every month. I can't believe how easy it is. And of course, that property, my dad found the property, got them started, but they did well.
Very well, yeah.
Yeah, and anyway, after I worked for the Navy for a while and went back to school, I met your father, Hugh. He was a friend of Johnny Sidderholm, who was from San Diego, and Johnny's girlfriend at that time, Evelyn, was my girlfriend. So we met through them, and that was nice. And my Aunt Naan died, and my dad wasn't doing, he had just been back to New York to see her. And I guess he flew. That was the first person that flew, I think.
Yeah.
And I took the railroad. He sent me back there when she died. She lived in a studio apartment in Brooklyn. She had cousins around there, and I met them, but we never kept up a real relationship. And but while I was in New York, Hugh, who I had met in San Diego, was in Cherry Point, North Carolina. And I told him I was going to be in New York. Guess what? First weekend, so was Hugh. And they at that time, I don't know if they do it now, you could take a plane from the Navy and fly up.
That's a pretty good deal.
And
Probably not. You probably can't do it anymore.
And I forget the field they landed in. It's not too far from Kennedy, I guess.
Like Roosevelt's Field or something. Maybe.
Yeah. No, it wouldn't be, well, who knows?
Could be, who knows?
Anyhow, so that took a few weeks of that, and that's when we got engaged. And after he got out of the Marine Corps, he went to work for United Airlines. And that's when we got married. But interesting apart that, in today's world, young people would never understand this. In 1946, he was hired to be a pilot with United Airlines, making $165 a month.
Wow.
With a $20 raise every 6 months. Boy, did we look for
Golden opportunity.
Well, he had a
tribute.
little money saved up, I guess. But anyway, it wasn't that much.
I want to take a break.
So I'm going to take a little break for